It is past midnight in a village in Galilee, and a girl is standing in the street holding a burning pole. You should picture it properly, not a little lamp cupped in her palm, a stick as long as her arm, with a wad of cloth wound tight around the top, soaked through with olive oil. It smokes, it smells, it drips. It throws enough light to fill the whole width of a street, and it is the reason her family let her stand out here in the dark at all. She has been holding it since sundown. Her wrist aches, and the edges of the rag have started to go gray. Down the street, 4 other girls are standing the same way, and behind them, 5 more. 10 of them in total, waiting for a wedding procession that was supposed to arrive hours ago. Somebody's cousin keeps saying he can hear drums. He cannot. There are no drums. There is a dog barking 2 streets over, and a baby crying in a house with the shutters closed, and above all of it, that particular silence a village makes when everyone in it is awake and pretending not to be worried. You know this story. That is the strange part. You have heard a sermon on it. 10 virgins, 5 wise, 5 foolish, and the moral you were handed was some version of stay awake, stay ready, don't fall asleep. So read the 5th verse again. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. All of them. Not 5, 10. The wise ones slept too. The ones who made it through the door were unconscious in the street when the shout came, exactly like the ones who did not. Which means whatever this parable is about, it cannot be about staying awake. The girls who got in were asleep. Here's what most people miss. The word your Bible translates as lamp in this passage is not the Greek word for a lamp. Jesus had a perfectly good word available, and he did not use it. He used a different one, and the moment you understand which one, 5 foolish girls stop looking careless and start looking like something far more uncomfortable. They start looking like people who did the math correctly. There's one more thing to hold on to before we start, and I want you to carry it with you for the next 20 minutes. At the end of this story, there is a door, a real one, a heavy courtyard door in a stone wall, barred by a wooden beam that dropped into sockets cut into the frame, and those sockets were cut on the inside. Somebody in that house had to lift the beam and set it down for that door to close. Read the verse. It does not say the bridegroom shut it. Hold on to that door. We are coming back to it, and it is not what you think it is, because this is not a story about staying awake. This is not a story about being late. This is not a story about 5 girls who forgot to pack something. This is a story about what you are carrying for a delay you have not planned for. And it starts with a torch. There are 2 words in Greek for something that burns and gives light, and they describe 2 completely different objects. The first is lychnos. That is a house lamp, a small clay dish about the size of your palm, pinched at one end to hold a wick. You fill it with olive oil, you light the wick, and it sits on a shelf and burns quietly for hours. When Jesus says a lamp is not lit to be put under a basket, that is a lychnos. When he says the eye is the lamp of the body, lychnos again, it is the ordinary word. It is the word everyone in that crowd used every single evening of their lives. He does not use it here. In the first verse of Matthew 25, the word is lampas, and a lampas is a torch, not a lamp on a shelf, a pole with rope or rag wound around the top, drenched in olive oil, carried in the hand and held above the head. It is made for the street, not the room. It gives off a huge, bright, uneven light that fills a courtyard and lets a crowd of people see each other's faces at midnight. And it burns for about 15 minutes. 15 minutes. That is the number that changes this parable. A little clay lamp will run all night on a few spoonfuls of oil because the wick sips at it. A torch does not sip. A torch is a fistful of oil-soaked cloth burning in open air, and it consumes everything it has fast, and then it starts to smoke, and then it dies. To keep it going, you have to bring it down, rewrap it, and soak it again from a supply you brought with you. So go back and read the 3rd and 4th verses with that in your hands. The foolish ones took their torches and took no oil with them. The wise took oil in vessels, along with their torches. Do you see what that is actually saying? All 10 girls showed up with a burning torch. Every single one of them had oil. You cannot light a torch without it. Nobody arrived with a dry stick. The foolish 5 were not the ones who forgot the oil. They were the ones who did not bring a second container. The Greek word for that container is angion, a flask, a small clay jar with a stopper, the kind you would carry on a cord over your shoulder. That is the entire visible difference between the two groups in this story. 5 girls have a flask, 5 do not. And here is the part that should bother you. The 5 without the flask were not careless. They were accurate. They brought exactly what a wedding requires when the bridegroom arrives at the hour everybody expects him. 15 minutes of burn for a procession that should have come at sundown. Their preparation was correct. Their arithmetic was right. They planned faithfully for the wedding they had every reason to believe was happening. They simply did not plan for a groom who was late. Jesus does not call them stupid, by the way. The word he uses carries the sense of being dull to what is coming, slow to reckon with the future. Their opposites are called phronimoi, which does not mean intelligent either. It means practically shrewd, streetwise, the kind of person who checks the sky before a long walk. This is not a story about smart girls and dumb girls. It is a story about 5 people who prepared for the expected and 5 who prepared for the delay. But it gets stranger, because to understand why a bridegroom would be that late, you have to understand what a Jewish wedding actually was, and it was nothing like yours. In the first century, getting married happened in 2 stages, separated by about a year. The first stage was called erusin, betrothal. And betrothal was not an engagement in any sense you would recognize. There was a contract, a cup of wine shared, a payment made to the bride's father, and words spoken in front of witnesses. When it was finished, the couple were legally married. Legally. You could not walk away from erusin with a conversation and a returned ring. It took a certificate of divorce. And then the groom went home without her. That is the part that undoes people. They were married and they lived apart because the groom's job during that year was to build. He went back to his father's house and he added rooms, a chamber for the 2 of them, attached to the family compound, made of the same stone. He cut it, he fitted it, he plastered it, and while he worked, she waited in her father's house with a contract that said she belonged to him and an empty calendar that said nothing about when. Because here is the detail that makes the whole thing ache. The groom did not decide when he was coming back. His father did. The father inspected the addition. The father judged whether it was finished. And until the father said the word, the son could not go and get his wife. If you had asked a betrothed man in Galilee what day his wedding was, he would have told you the truth. He did not know. Only his father knew. Now read a sentence you have heard at 100 funerals and never once heard as a wedding line. In my Father's house are many rooms. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself. That is not poetry. That is a betrothal contract, spoken in a room in Jerusalem to 11 men who knew exactly what it meant. And a few days earlier, the same man had told them that of that day and hour knows no one, not the angels, not even the Son, but only the Father. That is not a strange theological puzzle. That is just how weddings worked. So picture her again, a real girl in a real village, legally married to a man who is not there, and no date. Every evening for a year the sun goes down, and it might be tonight. She keeps a dress ready. She keeps her hair ready. She lives in a permanent almost, and the neighbors have started to be kind to her in that particular way that makes it worse. And we know how tightly these things were normally organized. The Mishnah, the collection of Jewish oral law, written down not long after this period, records which day of the week a wedding was supposed to fall on, and why, and what the courts had to do with it. That is how scheduled this world was. There were customs about the day. There were rules about the paperwork, which makes a groom who arrives at midnight not just inconvenient, it makes him almost scandalous. Stay with me, because you also need to see what these 10 girls were actually there to do. And it is not what the word virgins makes it sound like. They were not bridesmaids in the modern sense, standing in a line holding flowers. They were the welcome. When the procession finally came down the road, the streets were dark, no streetlights, no moon you could count on, a village of packed dirt lanes between stone walls. Somebody had to light the way, and somebody had to make it beautiful. There is a description of one of these processions written about 150 years before Jesus told this parable in the first book of Maccabees. A wedding party comes down from a place called Nadabath with drums and music and a great escort, and the bridegroom comes out to meet them with his friends. It is loud, it is physical, it fills the road, and Josephus, the Jewish historian, describes Samson's wedding running 7 days with 30 companions. 7 days. These were not ceremonies. They were the biggest thing that happened to a family in a generation, and the whole village came. So the girls with the torches were not security. They were the joy. Their entire job was to turn a dark street into a corridor of light, so that the moment the bridegroom came around the last corner, he came into brightness and noise and people. That is the assignment. Make his arrival glorious, which is why the ending of this parable is so hard. These are not outsiders. These are 5 people whose whole role was to celebrate him. And there is something else the crowd listening to Jesus knew about weddings that we tend to forget. They knew them as the place where the unexpected happens. Their national story starts with one. Jacob works 7 years for Rachel, and on the wedding night his father-in-law Laban swaps in her older sister Leah, and Jacob wakes up married to the wrong woman and has to work 7 more years for the right one. 14 years for a wedding. Nobody in that crowd heard the bridegroom tarried and thought that could never happen. They heard it and thought of course he did. The question was never whether the delay would come. The question was what you were carrying when it did. So that is 2 of the 4 details that change this parable. The torch that burns for 15 minutes, not the lamp that burns all night. And the wedding that had no date because only the Father knew when the room was finished. 2 left. The cry that came at midnight, and it is not the polite announcement you are imagining, and the door. If this is opening the passage up for you, subscribe before we go on. There is a whole series of these on this channel, and the next one lands soon. And while you are down there, answer this for me. Before today, what were you told the oil in this parable meant? Whatever your Sunday school teacher or your pastor said, put it in the comments. I want to see how many different answers we get, because by the end of this video, I think most of them are going to be wrong, including probably mine for about 15 years. Now, midnight. The 6th verse says that at midnight there was a cry made. That word cry is doing almost no work in English. In Greek it is krauge, and it is not an announcement. It is not a herald clearing his throat. Krauge is the word used for a scream, for wailing, for the noise a crowd makes when something has gone badly wrong or shockingly right. It is a harsh, ripping shout in a sleeping street, and it comes at midnight, not late, not fashionably delayed, midnight, hours past the point where anybody was still standing, hours past the point where the story stopped being about a wedding and started being about whether he was coming at all. So 10 girls come up out of sleep into a shout in the dark with their hearts going. And the 7th verse says they trimmed their lamps. Look at that verb, because it is the quiet proof of everything I told you about the torch. The Greek is from kosmio, to set in order, to arrange, to put right. It is the same root behind our word cosmetic, and you do not arrange a small clay lamp. There is almost nothing to arrange. You nudge the wick forward with a pin and you are finished. But a torch that has been burning for hours has a blackened, crumbling rag on the end of it. To bring it back, you unwind what is left, rewrap it, and soak it again. That is an arranging job. The vocabulary of this parable only makes sense if these are torches, and Jesus chose every word of it on purpose. Then the 8th verse, "Give us of your oil," the 5 say, "for our lamps are gone out." Except that is not quite what the Greek says. It is present tense. Our torches are going out. Right now. In our hands. Not out. Going. Sit in that for a second, because it is worse than the version you have in your head. These girls did not wake up to a dead stick. They woke up holding fire. Their torches were still burning when the shout came. They had light, just not enough of it, and they could see it happening. They could watch the flame pulling back into the rag while the drums got louder down the road. There is a particular kind of panic in that. It is not the panic of having nothing. It is the panic of having something and watching it run out while the thing you have been waiting for finally arrives. And this is where it gets remarkable, because of what the other 5 say back. Not so. lest there be not enough for us and for you. Go rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. That line has bothered honest people for 2,000 years. 5 believers standing in the street refusing to share with their friends. It reads as cold. It reads like exactly the kind of church behavior that drives people out of churches. Here's the part nobody tells you. It is not a refusal to be generous. It is a statement of fact about what oil is in this story. There are things you genuinely cannot hand to another person, not because you are selfish, because of what they are. You cannot give someone else your night shifts. You cannot transfer the 11 years you spent praying about something into somebody who prayed about it for a week. A man cannot give his wife the marriage he has built with her. They built it together, or they did not. Some things only exist in the person who accumulated them. Love does not change that. Love just makes it hurt more. The wise 5 are not saying we will not. They are saying it cannot be done. And if you have ever watched somebody you love hit a hard season with nothing in reserve, and realize that everything you know about God cannot be poured out of you and into them, you already understand this verse in your body, and no sermon needed to explain it. Which brings us to the question this entire parable is built around, and I want to take the popular answers apart one at a time. What is the oil? The most common answer you will hear is that the oil is the Holy Spirit. It sounds right. Oil is an anointing image all through the Old Testament. Samuel pours it on David's head. Priests are anointed with it. Kings are anointed with it. But look at the instruction. Go to them that sell and buy. You cannot buy the Holy Spirit. There is a man in the book of Acts who tries, and Peter's answer to him is one of the harshest things any apostle says to anybody. Whatever the oil is, it is something the parable says you can go and get. So it is not that. The second answer is good works. But this is the same chapter that ends with people who fed the hungry and clothed the naked and had no idea they had done anything at all. In this chapter, the people with the works are the ones who are surprised by them. Works are the evidence in Matthew 25. They are not the currency. The third answer is the one nobody says out loud, but almost everybody lives by, which is that the oil is showing up, being in the room. And I want to be careful here, because being in the room matters. But all 10 of these girls were in the room. All 10 were invited. All 10 had torches. All 10 were part of the wedding party. All 10 fell asleep in the same street. Proximity is the one thing every character in this story already has. So this is not a story about a spirit you can buy. This is not a story about works you can display. This is not a story about a room you can sit in. This is a story about something that only fills in private and only in advance. Augustine preached on this parable 1,600 years ago and got there before any of us. He asked what the oil was, and his answer was that it is what happens in your conscience rather than in the applause of other people. The part of your life with God that has no audience, the praying nobody live streams, the obedience in the specific decision nobody will ever know you made, the years of quiet, unglamorous faithfulness that produce absolutely nothing you can post. That is the flask. And you fill it in daylight when nothing is urgent, which is exactly why it is so easy not to. There is a mirror image of this scene in the Old Testament, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. A widow comes to the prophet Elisha. Her husband is dead, the creditors are coming for her 2 sons, and she has nothing in the house but a single pot of oil. Elisha tells her to go and borrow vessels from every neighbor she has, empty ones, and do not borrow a few. Then shut the door, he says, and start pouring. And she pours, and it keeps coming. It fills every jar in the room, and she says to her son, "Bring me another vessel." And he says, "There is not another vessel." And the oil stopped. That is the sentence. The oil stopped not because the God who supplies it ran short, but because the containers ran out. There was no limit on the supply. There was a limit on what she had prepared to receive it in. Now look at the 2 stories side by side. Elisha's widow borrows the vessels, shuts the door, and is saved. The foolish 5 try to borrow the oil, and the door shuts on them. The container you can get from someone else. What goes in it you cannot. And a generation before Elisha, there was a Gentile widow in Zarephath gathering 2 sticks to cook the last meal she expected to eat, and Elijah told her the jar of oil would not fail. It did not. through a drought that lasted years. That is what oil looks like when it is meant to survive a delay, not a full flask on a good day. A jar that keeps going long past the point where the arithmetic says it should have stopped. And Jesus is not the first person to describe a door closing on people who came looking too late. The prophet Amos, speaking to a nation that had every religious advantage available, said this: "Behold, the days come that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. And they shall wander from sea to sea, and from the north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, and shall not find it." That is not 5 girls at a door. That is an entire country running, searching for something that used to be everywhere, and finding nothing. "Go ye rather to them that sell." That line is not practical advice. That is the sound of a door that has already started to close. And then there is the detail that keeps me from ever preaching this parable as a threat. Jesus told this story on a Tuesday, sitting on the Mount of Olives, looking down at the temple. About 72 hours later, he is in a garden on the same hill, and he asks 3 men to stay awake with him for 1 hour, and they cannot do it. He comes back and finds Peter asleep, and he says it. "Could you not watch with me 1 hour?" The Greek verb he uses is gregorite, the exact word that ends this parable. Watch. Peter slept, in the actual moment, in the real garden, with the real bridegroom 3 steps away and blood on his face. And Peter was not shut out. Peter denied him before dawn and wept and was still restored on a beach over breakfast a few weeks later. So sleeping is survivable. It has to be, or Peter does not make it, and neither does anybody watching this. The 5 who were shut out did not lose because they slept. They lost because when the delay came, there was nothing left in reserve to burn. There is one more person in the Gospels who carried a lampas. He is not in this parable. He shows up 2 chapters later, in the dark, in a garden on the side of a hill. And John, who was standing close enough to see it, tells us exactly what he was holding. Judas, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, cometh thither with lanterns and torches and weapons. The same word, the same object, a pole with a rag on the end, soaked in oil, burning in a black garden at midnight. Hold the picture for a second. A man walks toward a bridegroom carrying a torch, the exact item 10 girls were holding while they waited to celebrate one, and he uses it to find the face he is about to kiss. And here is what should stop you. Judas was not a stranger who wandered in. He had spent 3 years inside the smallest circle any human being has ever been part of. He held the money bag. He ate from the same dish. He heard every parable, including this one, from about 8 feet away, 3 days earlier. If proximity to the bridegroom were the thing that saved people, Judas would be the safest man in the New Testament. And when the torchlight fell on him in that garden, Jesus said one word to him: "Friend, friend, why have you come?" 3 years of access, every sermon, the storm on the lake, the girl raised from the dead. Judas saw it in person, standing closer than anyone watching this will ever stand. He had the torch, he had the invitation, he had the room, he had no flask. There's one more thing, and it is the one I asked you to hold on to at the beginning. The 10th verse. "And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came. And they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut." I told you there was a door. I told you that a courtyard door in that world was barred by a wooden beam that dropped into sockets cut on the inside, so somebody in that house had to lift it and set it down. And I told you the text does not say the bridegroom shut it. Look at the Greek, ekklisthe. It is passive. The door was shut. Matthew, writing about a story he heard with his own ears, does not name the person who closed it. He had every opportunity to write, and the bridegroom shut the door. He did not. There is only one other door in the Bible that closes like this, and it is the first one. Noah is 600 years old. The animals are in. His sons are in. He has spent decades building an enormous wooden box in a country with no sea, listening to what his neighbors said about him, and now he is standing inside it in the dark, smelling wet timber and animals, waiting. And the 7th chapter of Genesis says this: and the Lord shut him in. Noah did not close that door. He could not have. God closed it. And the same act that shut Noah in shut everybody else out. And there is no way to read that verse and feel only one thing about it. So here is the question I want to leave with you about the door in this parable, and it took me years to see it. Why did it close? We assume rejection. We picture a bridegroom hearing 5 voices outside and deciding coldly to leave them there. But that is not what the text describes, and it is not what a first-century wedding was. The door closed because the wedding started. That is all. The procession arrived, the party went in, and the door of the house was barred behind them, the way the door of every house in that village was barred every night of the year. Not as a punishment, as the beginning of the celebration. The most joyful moment in that family's entire generation is the exact moment that door came down, and the two facts are the same fact. That is gentler than cruelty, and it is far more final. You cannot argue with a bridegroom who is not angry with you. There is nobody to appeal to. The thing you missed was not a deadline, it was a wedding. And then the sentence. The 5 come back, and they knock, and they say, "Lord, Lord, open to us." And he answers, "I do not know you." I want you to hear how strange that answer is, because it does not fit the crime. They were late. He could have said, "You are late." He could have said, "You were not ready," or "You did not take this seriously," or "You had one job." Every one of those would have made sense. He does not say any of them. He says something that is not about their behavior at all. The Greek is uk oida himas, and oida is the verb for knowing a fact, knowing information, knowing that something is the case. Earlier in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, there is a line that sounds identical in English but is not. There he says, "I never knew you," and the verb is ginosko, relational knowing, the word for knowing a person rather than a fact. Put them together and you get the whole weight of it. He is not saying you were bad. He is not saying your record is insufficient. He is saying something colder and simpler and far worse. We never met. Which brings me to the part of this that stopped being a Bible study for me and started being about my own life. Everybody in this story planned for a wedding. Nobody planned for a delay. And you do the same thing. So do I. You build a faith that works on the timeline you are expecting. You can hold on for 3 months. You can pray about something for a year. You can trust God through a hard season with a visible end to it. And you should be proud of that, because that is real. But nobody packs a second flask for the version of the story where God takes longer than you can currently imagine. You know the room I mean. 3 in the morning in a hospital corridor, in the chairs with the wooden arms. Your phone is at 4%. The snacks you brought are gone. The doctor said someone would come out and talk to you, and that was 5 hours ago. And you have run out of the thing you came in with. Not your faith. Your reserves. The part that was going to carry you through a normal length wait, or the prayer you have been praying for 11 years. Not 11 days. 11 years. The one you have stopped bringing up with people because you can see them running out of things to say. That prayer is a delayed bridegroom. And the only question that matters in this parable is whether there is anything left in the flask when the shout finally comes at midnight. And this is the reason I do not think Jesus told this story to frighten anybody. Read it again. Nobody in this parable is out of time yet. The torches are still burning. The rags are still holding. The shout has not come, and the door is wide open. And the only reason to tell somebody about a flask is that there is still time to go and get one. There is still time tonight. The door in this parable is open. It only closes when the wedding begins. So let me give you 3 things to take out of this, and then I will let you go. The first one is a fact, and it is the one that undoes the sermon most of us grew up on. Sleep was never the sin. All 10 girls slept. The wise ones were unconscious in the same street on the same night as the foolish ones, and 5 of them still walked through that door. Nobody was disqualified for being tired. The difference between the 2 groups was decided long before midnight. It was decided in daylight, on an ordinary afternoon, when one group put a flask on a cord over their shoulder and the other group looked at a full torch and thought, "That will be enough." The second one is personal, and it is harder. You cannot borrow it. Not from your husband or your wife. Not from your pastor. Not from your parents' faith, however real theirs was. Not from a church that is doing everything right around you while nothing is happening inside you. And this is the one that catches people in their 40s, from the version of yourself who believed easily 15 years ago and has been living off the fumes of it ever since. Some things only fill in private, and only in advance, and no one who loves you can pour theirs into you no matter how much they want to. And the third one is not really a lesson. It is just the sentence, and I cannot get away from it. He did not say you failed. He did not say you were late. He did not say you should have known better. He said, I do not know you. Everything in this parable, the torch, the flask, the year of waiting, the shout at midnight, the beam dropping into the sockets, all of it comes down to one question, and it is not about your performance. It is about whether the bridegroom can say your name. That is the whole thing, not how much you did, whether he knows you. So before you click away, tell me which of the 4 details changed this parable the most for you. The torch that only burns for 15 minutes, the wedding with no date because only the father knew, the cry at midnight, or the door that closed not because he was angry, but because the wedding had started. Put it in the comments. I read every single one of them. And then go and think about the girl in the street. She is still standing there in the cold with a pole in her aching hand and a rag going gray at the edges. And it is going to be another 2 hours before anybody hears anything. She does not know that. She has no idea how long this is going to take. But there is a small clay flask on a cord against her hip, and when the shout finally comes, she is going to be the light on the road.